So we're going to be using page 11 of the pack, and we're going to look at how much energy is actually absorbed by the producer and then how much energy is then available to pass along the food chain. So we're going to be looking at the figures from this diagram. So we can see from our diagram that there are 1,000 units of solar energy that is available, and we need to imagine that this piece of paper is our 1,000 units, so this is 100% of the energy that can be absorbed by the plant. And we can see that there's a large arrow where the wavelengths are unable to be absorbed by the chlorophyll, because the chlorophyll can only absorb a specific wavelength. So immediately we can see that about 50% of our energy that was available from the sun is going to be removed because it is an incorrect wavelength. So the plant cannot use it and cannot absorb it. So we'll label that bit incorrect wavelength. So although we had this total amount of energy that's available, the incorrect wavelength cannot be absorbed. So we are left with just the correct wavelength of energy. But we can see that some of the energy is reflected from the leaf and that some will be transmitted straight through. So if it doesn't hit a chloroplast, then the chlorophyll will not be able to absorb the energy. Therefore, it will just travel straight through the leaf itself. And it's about 20% of this remaining amount of energy that will be lost. So we'll roughly cut off about 20%. We can see that that is reflected and transmitted. So I'll label that as R&T for reflected or transmitted. So this piece of paper that we've got left is the amount of energy that is then going to be the correct wavelength, and it will hit a chloroplast and it will be able to be absorbed by the plant itself. Now that energy, a lot of it will be used in the photosynthetic reactions that are going to occur in the plant, and about 75% of the energy that is actually absorbed by the plant is used up for those particular reactions. So 75% of that remaining sheet of paper is used in the photosynthetic reactions. So actually we are only left with a fairly small piece of paper, and that amount is the amount of gross primary production. Okay, so that is the amount of chemical energy that can actually be stored, and it represents the total amount of biomass that can be made in photosynthesis. But because the plant is actually going to be respiring, a lot of the glucose that is produced during photosynthesis is going to be used during respiration. So about 40% of our GPP, our gross primary production, is going to be used for respiration. So then we are left with our net primary production. And our net primary production takes into account the amount of energy that can then be stored in the plant biomass. So this is when the biological molecules, so things like cellulose and proteins, are produced, they are in the net primary production. It's the gross primary production, the total amount of biomass that could be made, but then the glucose is generally used in respiration. So it's only this amount of energy that can then be transferred along the food chain. So if we look back at our packs, and we can see the summary of energy transfer and the efficiency of it from the actual energy that's available from the sun, only about 5% is going to be transferred to the producers, and that's due to the amount of energy. That's the incorrect wavelength, taking into account what is reflected and transmitted, and then from what is absorbed by the plant, the large amount of energy that's used for photosynthetic reactions, and then you've got the actual plant respiring itself, so there is only the net primary production that can then be passed along to the primary consumer. So we also need to bear in mind that from the amount of biomass that was in a plant, if a herbivore did come along and consume that plant, then the only energy that they would be able to consume was the net primary production. But that animal itself would then be respiring, so a lot of that energy that was absorbed would be used up in respiration. There would be parts of the plant that it wouldn't be able to digest, so parts like cellulose, that would be lost in feces. There would also be some parts of the plant that wouldn't be eaten, that would be left over. So in terms of the net primary production, from what we had of the plant, we would then need to work out how much energy was actually transferred to that consumer by looking at how much was ingested, which was the total amount of energy that was available to it, and then take away the amount of energy that was lost in feces and the amount that was lost in respiration. So if we went back to our small bit of paper, that was our net primary production, that was from the plant, as it goes along the food chain to the primary consumer, which is usually going to be a herbivore, then you will see that a lot of that energy will be lost as respiration and also in the feces, because a herbivore will eat a large amount of cellulose. If a carnivore then comes along as a secondary consumer and they will eat the primary consumer, because they are carnivores, then they are going to be a little bit more efficient because they're able to absorb a lot of the food because they're going to be consuming the protein and they can digest this very efficiently. But as you go further along the food chain, you've gone from a large amount of energy that was available from the sun to the actual small amount that can be absorbed by the plant and converted into biomass, and then whatever the net primary production is, you're then going to lose energy in respiration and feces as you go along the food chain.